Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Sanhedrin Daf Yud Beis. Just one more day, two more blot, one more day of this Masechta. As you can see, Yud Beis is a pretty normal sized daf. We're going to be starting at the Gemara on the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Beis, 7 lines from the bottom. And today we'll be heading until about 3/4 of the way down on Yud Beis Amud Beis at the two dots, up to Amar of Chizda. I think that's where we're stopping. Yeah. And then tomorrow we'll learn Kuf Yud Gimel, Amud Aleph, and then the very few lines on Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Beis. And Amir Hashem will have a siyum to follow. I would normally like to do the food first, but we won't have learned yet, so we have to finish all the learning. So let's get started with today's daf. Again, Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, 7 lines from the bottom. Tanu Rabbana. We had mentioned a pasuk in the Mishnah. If you look back at the Mishnah in the middle of the page, it says that the people who partook in the Irani Dachas, they did Avodah Zorah, that they have no chelik in Olam Haba, because the pasuk says Yatsu Anashim B'nei Belial Mikirbecha V'Yadichu Es Yoshve Ira. So we're going to pick apart elements of that pasuk. The Gemara says Yatsu. What does that mean? Yatsu Anashim B'nei Belial. Yatsu Hein V'lo Shluchin. The people who commit the crime of being Mesis Mediach, of being Mediach a city, it has to be them, but not their messengers. It has to be one man to everyone. It's a very difficult task. You have to convince at least 51% of the city on your own. Anoshim, ein anoshim, pachos mishnayim. And it has to be a minimum of a group of people. Davar acher, anoshim means velo noshim, anoshim velo ktanim. Maybe anoshim means something else. Maybe anoshim means that a woman cannot be the cause of an ir hanidachas. Let's say you have a woman who just has the power of speech, and she's convincing, and she convinces a lot, so she can do the same exact crime as a man, but that's not an ir hanidachas. By the way, she'd still get killed. She just wouldn't get killed with an ir hanidachas punishment of sayiv. She'd get killed with a avodah zarah punishment of skila. But nevertheless, we wouldn't have that din of an ir hanidachas if it was a woman or if it was a child. B'nei Belial, beautiful plan words. B'nei Belial, banim sheparku ol. Beli ol. That's what Belial means, that there is no yoke anymore. Sheparku ol shamayim mitzavarehem. That's the language of B'nai Mikir b'cha v'lo min sapar. It has to be in the middle of the country, and it cannot be a border town. Even if you checked every other box, you had one person doing all the convincing, it was a man, all the other features that we discussed in our Mishnah, which made it anyways very difficult. We spoke about the fact that by Irani Dachas, that everybody needs Hasra and Beis Edom. Let's not forget that Hasra is Toch K'dei Dibur. It's extremely difficult to generate an Irani Dachas. But even if you had all of that, but it was on Haifa, it was a border town on the country, right? Or something that overlooks whatever the border is to the other side, because the real borders of Eretz Yisrael are bigger than what we have now. So Lomina Sapar, that would not be an Irni Dachas. Yoshve Iram v'lo Yoshve Iracheres. It has to be the inhabitants of that actual city and not guests. Leimor shetzrichin edim v'asra l'chol echad ve'echad. That every single individual needs to have hasra. That's unbelievable threshold. Even for one person, that's difficult. I mean, that's what we said. A Bezdin Achzari would have what case every 70 years. Can you imagine a city of people like... There's a shita like that. Right.
I think there's one guy who chickens out from Hasra and it's over.
I mean, yeah, it would really have to be some awful Rishayim that, and all of them would have to be rotten. Itmar. Machlokas in the Amoraim. Rav Yochanan Amar Cholken Ir Achas L'Shnei Shvatim. A city can be split into two Shvatim. We actually have elements of this in Yerushalayim, where you have Yehuda being part of it, and the other part is Binyamin, I think. I think they split Binyamin and Yehuda. So that means that according to him, you can still have an Ir Hanidachas in one city, even if that one city is comprised of two Shvatim. The city limits are a circle. The shevet limits are the line through the circle, and that's what the Gemara says is possible. In the name of Rav Yochanan, Reish Lakish Amar, no, ein cholkin ir achas lebeis shvatim. Even when in the Chalukah of Eretz Yisrael, we would not have done that. If the border of Shevet Ephraim, wherever it was located in such a way that it ran through a city, we would have moved the border to the edges of the city. Eisvei Rav Yochanan the Reish Lakish. Rav Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, how do you know you're right? Ad sheyehu Madicheha me'osa here, ume'osa shevet. We have a limiting factor when it comes to ir hanidacha, says Rav Yochanan to Reish Lakish, that the madiach has to be from the same city and from the same shevet. My laba al gav the madicheha me'osa ir i'ika me'osa shevet eni lo. And Shema Minachol Ken Irachas Shvatim. It seems, says Rabbi Yochanan, that the Brisa indicates, or at least hints to the fact, that really it should be that one city can be split into two Shvatim. So says the Gemara, no, that's not a good argument against Rish Lakish Lo. The Nafal Le Yerusha. We could have a city that has people from different Shvatim in it, even if it's not split down the middle by Shevet. How can that happen? If there's a Yerusha. So let's say, for example, that a man only has daughters, and he bequeaths to his daughter their shevet, and then she has a son, and the son inherits the mother's portion, which is really the mother's father's portion, which is from a different shevet. So we can come up with an ukimta quickly and easily that would indicate that you can have people from multiple shvatim in the same place. So that is not a question on Reish Lakish Inami, the Yahavu Hanehale, that perhaps something was gifted to this person, this piece of property was gifted to someone from another shevet. Therefore, the question that Rav Yochanan asks is no longer in place. Let's try again. Esve, 2 lines from the bottom on Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. Arim Tesha Me'eis Shnei HaShvatim Ha'ela, 9 cities from the Shvatim. My lav Arba Upalga Mehai, Arba Upalga Mehai. When we see 9 cities and it's split between 2 people, well, what is the equitable division of 9? It's 4.5. So says the Gemara, V'shma mina cholken ir achas lebeis shvatim. We see over here that it is possible to split a city between 2 shvatim. And if that's true, then that is a kasha on Reish Lakish, who says that that's not possible. So says the Gemara, lo, arba mehai v'chamesh mehai. No, it doesn't have to be perfectly equitable, as I tell my children all the time. I know you think everything is supposed to be fair. Fair is a word that you made up that doesn't really pan out. That's not how things work. So sometimes it's 4 and 5. That's what the Gemara says over here, that no, when the Brisa says, when the Pasuk says actually that it's Tesha me'esh shnei shvatim ha'ela, the division is not exacting. It's 5 and 4. If that's true, then why did the pasuk say 9 and the 2 shvatim? If you wanted to be super clear, you should have said 5 for this one and 4 for that one. Why did you say 9 divided by 2? Says the Gemara, Taka, you're right. Kasha, turning to the top of Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, that is a difficulty. The Gemara says, let's say that the people in the city, they became hudach on their own. So how would that work? Would that be considered an ir hanidachas? Do we need the madche? Do we need the person doing the convincing, the charismatic evangelist? Do we need that person? So it says the Gemara, do we say v'yadlichu amarachmana below shehudchu me'alehen? We need a madiach, someone who's going to be doing the convincing to do avodah zarah, and not that people should decide on their own. Dilma afilu hudchu me'alehen. So how do we determine an ir hanidachas? Does an ir hanidachas require the evangelist? Or if the people decide on their own, I don't even know how that happens. They decide on their own at the same time, that they're all 51% all of a sudden start worshiping avodah zarah in a very rapid time frame. But there was no, so this says the Gemara, how do we answer this? 3 lines down, Toshma, hidichu an nashim uktanim. If nashim and ktanim do the hadacha, so says the Gemara, Amayle habekut chumealein. Why would you say that they are pater? It must be that there were hudach me'alein would be a problem. We don't say that, and because we don't say that, so therefore we see that it can't be that it's hudach me'alein. If it was hudach me'alein, it would be no worse than nashim uktanim. So therefore, it must be that it is v'yadichu amarachmana. So says the Gemara, not necessarily. Hanach basar nafshayu gride, hani basar nashim uktanim gride. Those who were convinced on their own, those people are a higher level. Those people are a higher level Baal Avodah Zarah, right? If I decide sitting in the Skokie library that I'm going to pursue another religion, that takes a lot of fortitude. If I was instead convinced by a charismatic woman or child, that takes less fortitude. So the Gemara says that's the distinction between them, and therefore we cannot bring a raya from over here. And our machlokas between Beis Shammai and, not Beis Shammai, between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish remains. We had said in our Mishnah yesterday, Ad Shiadiach Yudach Ruba, that 51% of the city has to start worshiping idols. So says the Gemara, Hechi Avdinan. How is it that we get to this tally? What's the problem? Let's see in the Gemara. Amar Yehuda, Danan v'chovshin, Danan v'chovshin. We judge one case. We say, okay, this guy's guilty. And then the chovshin, they put him into a prison cell. And the same thing for the next person. So you'll basically have, the full county lockup is filled with people who are doing avodah zarah. When you get to 51%, then they're all killed like an irani dachas. Says the Gemara, that doesn't work with something that we learned previously in this very Masechta. Amar le'ula nimsa atame'ane es dinan shel elu. We have a halacha that you're not allowed to torture a person once we know that they are going to be receiving a capital punishment. And here you're saying done in v'chovshin. You can't put them in the cell for more than a day. It's impossible. So says the Gemara, Amar ula, I disagree with you. It's not done in v'chovshin. Rather, what you do is done in v'soklin, done in v'soklin. If you see a person in the city doing avodah zarah, and again, checking all the boxes, edim, hasra, everything else, he goes to court, they paskin on him, and then he's killed right away. And then done in v'soklin on the next guy too. And then, once you see that you have reached 51% of the people in your community have been killed by skila, so now we know 51% are worshiping avodah zarah, then the rest get killed under the guidelines of Ir Hanidachas. Totally different landscape than one would have thought off the cuff. I would have thought that an Ir Hanidachas is, oh my gosh, look at all these people, everybody grab a sword and start killing people. That's not what's happening. What's happening is, according to Ula, the way we measure is that once we individually kill 51% of that community, and the remaining people in front of us are still doing, then everybody else dies through cherev, through saif. That is what the Gemara means. And Itmar Rav Yochanan Amar, he says the same thing, done in v'soklin, done in v'soklin. Now, Reish Lakish again takes a contrarian perspective. Reish Lakish Amar Marbin Lahen Bate Dinin. What we do is we bring a lot of Bate Din into town. And how does that help? Because then perhaps we can get everyone to be decided upon in the same day. Says the Gemara, Eini, is that really true that we bring in a lot of Bate Din? After all, V'amar Rav Chama bar Asi, Amar Rav Oshai, V'otzeisa es ha'ishahu, o es ha'isha hahi. Ish v'isha atamotzi l'sharecha, v'atamotzi kol ha'ir kula l'sharecha. You can take individuals into court, but you can't bring everyone into court in a community. Courts are not structured like that halachically or practically. So therefore, you can't say on every street corner, like Chabad blowing shofar on Rosh Hashanah, we have another bezdin. You're doing avodah zarah, stand right here. We're just going to get you killed. Please wait. No, it doesn't work that way. So therefore, says the Gemara, Elamar bilan bate din, and we do in fact have a lot of bate din, but they're not meeting out punishments. Ume'ainin b'dineim, they're just analyzing. They're watching. Yeah, this is definitely irani dachas. And once they decide it's irani dachas, then umaskinan lahu lebezdin agadol v'gamrei lahu ledinaihu v'kadli lahu. So here we have like a staggered approach. The first approach, according to Reish Lakish, really according to Ula, is not Ula. It's Reish Lakish. That really what we're going to do is we're going to have a lot of the Bezdins of 23, but they're not there to mete out punishments. All they're doing is assessing the situation. If they feel that really everyone is guilty, then they kick things up to the next court, and that is going to be the Bezdin Agadol. The pasuk says Haketake es Yoshvei Ha'ir. They need to be hit. Says the Gemara Tanu Rabbanan, as we saw in the last blot. Hachamart v'agamalt. If you have a donkey driver or a camel driver, ha'overes mimakom lamakom, and lanu besocha v'hud cha'ima, and you have a visitor with his horse, with whatever animal, and he sleeps over and he's hudach. He ends up doing avodah zarah while he's there. Im nishtao sham lamed yom, if he was there for at least 30 days, hein b'sayif u'mamonan avad, then he gets sayif, which means that he's part of the irani dachas, because the punishment for irani dachas is sayif. Pachos mikan, if he was there for 29 days or less, then hein b'skilo mamonan palad. Then they get skila. Then they're not really b'nei ha'ir. They're not hud cha'im mohen per se. They did avodah zarah. They should be killed, but they're not part of the people of that town. Says the Gemara, how can you say that? And we're halfway down on Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. We're a minhi. Kama yihya be'ir v'yihya ka'anshe ha'ir. How long must a person be in a city to be like the people of the city? So what does the Gemara over here say? Yud Beis Chodesh. Hold on one second. A couple of lines ago, you tried to tell me that I know that a person is part of a city as it relates to Ir Nidachas once they've been there for 30 days. Yet this brisa seems to say that a person only becomes like Anshe Ha'ir after 12 months. That's when you're called a person who's a resident of this city. That's a 12-month line. And mesav mata, the one who's just there as okay, I'm a dweller, but I'm a short-term dweller. I'm staying in the local hotel, ordering room service. I don't really live here. I'm just on a business trip. So that is going to be 30 days. The Hatanya, and this Hatanya is benichusa, as Rashi says. Often V'hatanya is a question. Here, this V'hatanya is a supporting line. Hamudar hana min b'nei ha'ir. If a person says, I make a commitment to not get benefit from the people in that particular city, if somebody lived in that city for 12 months, so then he is a city dweller, and asr lehanos mimenu. But pachos mikan, if it's less, motor lehanos mimenu. What about miyoshvei ha'ir? About those who are settled in the city. So we see these principles are holding true. And therefore, to summarize this section, is that 30 days is the line in the sand for being a part of an Ir Hanidachas. So if I have a 4-week business trip, 28 days, and I join, Rahman al-Itzlan, I were to join and do Avodah Zarah with everybody else, I would not be treated like those who are part of an Ir Hanidachas. I would instead be treated like an individual who does Avodah Zarah and get skila instead. Tanu Rabbanan, the pasuk says that everything needs to be destroyed. Hacharem. The pasuk says Hacharem osa, and let's skip the next 4 words. Prat lenichse tzadikim shebechutzala. Yes, everything in town needs to be destroyed, but if there are items that belong to a tzaddik and his items are outside of the city limits, we don't get them and bring them into the city. What do the next 4 words mean? This is why we ignored them before. Veskol asher ba. This means everything in the city. That's an all-inclusive language. What are you coming to add? However, if the property of a tzaddik was in town, then in fact they would get destroyed. Shilala, what about the spoils? V'lo shlal shamayim. If something belongs to the Eibishter, we're not allowed to do that. So we'll be talking about that extensively on the Amud Beis. Whereas a tzaddik and his properties, if the tzaddik's properties are outside of the city limits, we don't bring them in to burn them when a city is being destroyed. But the property of a rasha that's outside, we do bring into the city limits to be destroyed. Reb Shimon was known for being doresh taima dekra. So he wants to know, why would we say that the properties of a righteous person that are in the city should be burned? Why? Righteous people don't do Avodah Zarah. Why is he being penalized? So the Gemara says, and let's remember, this is being Doresh Time of the Kror. Reb Shimon's trying to get into the mind Kaviyachol of the Eibishter to understand why is it that we say that the property of a tzaddik gets burned if it's in the city limits of the Ir Nidachas. Says the Gemara, a very sharp line, Mi garam lahem sheyadu b'socha. Who's the one who told the tzaddik to go live amongst a bunch of Rishaim who are Ovdei Avodah Zarah? That's not the right way to do things. Mamona, obviously must have been money-based, either had business there or good real estate. Lefichach mamona nova. Therefore, even though it's true that the tzaddik who lives in this town of the Ir Nidachas never did anything wrong, but his property will be destroyed nevertheless. Let's analyze this brisa. We're 2/3, 3/4 of the way down, 8 lines before the wide lines on Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. Omar Mar, we just learned in our brisa, we said that the property of a rasha that's outside of the city limits, but that rasha lives in the city limits and he's part of the Ir Nidachas, they'll bring his items into town and destroy them. Let's analyze this. Omar Rav Chizda, uvinikbatzen lesocha. That's only true if they can be gathered into it. This is referring to time frame. So let's say that my office is more than a day's travel from the city limits. That doesn't fall into the category of uvinikbatzen lesocha. Next, Amar Rav Chizda, piktono shel anshe ir hanidachas mutarin. If there is a collateral item, an item that's being stored in the ir hanidachas, so that's mutar, namely that we're not going to destroy that within the pasuk of hacharem osam. So says the Gemara, what's the case? Hey chidami. Ilema dir acheres. Ve'isnahu begavo pshita demutarin. Lav shlolahu. If you want to say that the Pikadon is in another city and that's where it's located, Pashut, it's not going to be destroyed. It doesn't belong in this city. It's not owned by anyone in this city. And if it could be gathered in and really it belongs to a Russia, it's just being housed by someone outside the city, but it's within walking distance, amay mutarin. If it's far away, that was a din that Rav Chizda just said a moment ago, that there's no reason to include the item of a rush in the city if it's more than a day's walk from the city limits. So says the Gemara on the last of the short lines, really, the item that belongs to a person who lives in the city is being stored outside of the city. A person accepted achrayas on the item. And the Gemara gives a beautiful svara. If I'm watching something in town, I live in the Ir Nidachas, but your item that I'm watching is within walking distance. It's right outside the walls of the city. And I function as someone who's mikabel achrayas. So then I might have thought that it's kididei dami. It's like it's mine and it should therefore be burnt. Says the Gemara Kamash Milan that it is not burnt. Amar Chizda behema chetzia shel ir hanidachas v'chetzia shel ir acheres. An animal that has two owners. One owner lives in the ir hanidachas, and another owner lives in a non-ir hanidachas. So the animal, we're not. It's not like bris bein abisarim. We're not going to kill the animal, right? So what do we do? How do we treat that animal, which is chatzi ir hanidachas and chatzi ir acheres? Says the Gemara asura, and it has to be destroyed. And the reason why that's true is a very interesting ha'ara on the side. I don't know if all of you have this, but I have an interesting line here that says, "De'i efshar l'chazayis basar below shchita." The animal's half usr, so there's no way you can eat it because you need to do shchita. So by definition, the whole animal has to be killed and cannot be eaten. However, while it's true that an animal has to be split in half and therefore it would be asura, if you had isa, if you had dough, so then chetzia shel ir hanidachas v'chetzia shel ir acheres muteres. If a person is making dough and it's half owned by the ir hanidachas and half owned by another city, that we would say is muteres. Because why? It's so easy to split challah. Even if you don't take a knife, you could tear it with your bare hands. My time behema command delo pliga damya. An animal is like something that could not be split without killing it. And isa dough command de pliga damya. It's easy to separate one part of the dough from the other. Another question the Gemara poses 8 lines from the bottom of the page, last of the middle width lines on Kuf Yud Beis and Aleph. Boy Rav Chizda behemas ir hanidachas mahu detishani bashchita letahara mide nevela. I understand if you're saying that the animal of an ir hanidachas has to die. Understand. But I'd rather do a proper shchita so that there's no tumas nevela. That prevents problems for me. Can I do such a thing? So says the Gemara, it should be done by the sword. Loshna shachta mishchat, loshna katla miktal. Doesn't matter. One way or the other, the animal is going to die, and the animal is going to be considered an nevela. You cannot get rid of the tuma odilna. Or perhaps we should say that kevan de shachta mahanu lashchita. My, what's the din? Teku. We don't know the answer to that question. It's actually a beautiful lamdisha question. If I kill the animal with shchita, even though it's aser alt ir nidachas, would it still be tamei nevela? And that the Gemara says is a teku. Next question. Boy Rav Yosef, Seyar Nashim Tzidkanios Mahu, the hair of righteous women, what is the din about that as it relates to an ir nidachas? Does it need to be burned, yes or no? Amar Rava Hadarashios Aser, are you saying that the hair of a woman who's a Rasha, that her hair does need to be burned? After all, that can't be. Tikbots v'sarafta ksiv. Misheinu mechusar ela kvitza v'sreifa. What do we say are things that need to be burned? Things that just need to be gathered and then burned. Yatzazeh, that doesn't apply to a person's hair. Shemechusar tlisha. It's still attached to the person's head. It's not just gathering. Because it's attached to the person's head. Yatzazeh shemechusar tlisha v'kvisa v'sreifa. So therefore, you should not even leave the implication that a person's hair should be burned in ir nidachas. Says the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom. We're talking about a wig. This should be a nice throwback to about 10 years ago with the whole wig debacle of the Indian hair that might have a din of avodah zarah. Anyone remember this? The hair issue. That this was a fascinating thing that took place. We were afraid that there was either hair that was either worshipped or tikroves avodah zarah. People were throwing out expensive shetels. It was a whole big tumult. So I'm sure this Gemara was invoked in those conversations. So says the Gemara, if we have an irani dachas and there's a shetel from the irani dachas, how do we treat that? If she's wearing it on her head right now, it's not really mechubar begufa. I mean, there's clips, but it's not really mechubar begufa. But if she's wearing it, kikufa damya, we're not going to say that it's not part of her. We're not going to burn it and take it off her head and burn it. So says the Gemara, lo tzricha de tali besivta. Really, the hair, the shetel is sitting on a hook. It's sitting on a shetel head, whatever the case may be. Our question is like this: that really it's like the property of a righteous person that's within city limits, and therefore it gets destroyed. Or since it's that kind of thing that you often put on and take off, so then it has a din of a clothing, and therefore teku. We don't know the answer to this question either. The pasuk says, that all of the spoils of the city need to be gathered and burned in the middle of the city. This is part of the din of irani dachas. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught us in a brisa. En la rechov, if there's no street inside that city, that's not considered to be an irani dachas. You need a road that runs through the city. Rabbi Akiva Omer, ein la rechov, osen la rechov. If there isn't a city that has a road, build the road, and then you'll have a city that's shaykh for irani dachas. Now, obviously, we can already project what this machlokas is about. B'mai kamiflage mar savar rechova me'ikara mashma. According to the shita of Rabbi Shmuel, he's of the opinion that when the brisa says that ein lo rechov, or I should say, when the pasuk says el toch rechova shalir, that means that the road already has to be there. That's me'ikara mashma. However, the last few words on the page, Umar Sava Rabbi Akiva, who said that if there's no street, you build one, he was of the opinion that Rechova Hashtanami, Mashma, doesn't have to be there from before. It can even be there as an additional. At the very top of the page, we're going to start talking about things that don't typically get burnt in an irani dachas. What are those things? Those are the things that belong to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. If something is hektish, if something is muzman, is set aside for a korban, those things are not going to be destroyed in an irani dachas. So says the Gemara, "B'ha'hekdesho sheba yiftutanu rabbanon hayu ba kodshim." So it depends. Kodshe mizbeach yamusu. For kodshe mizbeach, those are going to be left to die. Let's look at a beautiful Rashi that is so seemingly surprisingly lengthy, considering what Rashi typically does, which is say two words and make you sweat to figure out the rest. What does it mean? The kache mizbeach ar yamusu kigon olos va'ashamos shel rishayim besocha nihita lo karinan behu es kol behemta levi chorev. I agree that we can't kill the animal if it's in an irhani dachas. Da lo behemtahi, that doesn't belong to an individual. It's set aside as a korban. Ela behemas shamayim, that's not yours. Ella, the problem is that while it is behemas shamayim, it's me'isusa hi lahakriv korbano shel rishayim halalu shehudchu. But it's not appropriate, says Rashi, to bring a korban that was muzman by an oved kochavim. Hilkach yamusu. We put it inside a little pen. We've learned about this Gemara before many blot ago, that we basically force feed it until it dies. So going back in the Gemara, it says that if you have an animal that was owned by someone who did avodah zarah and it's kadshe mizbeach, like as Rashi pointed out, an ola or an asham, that animal has to be put into a pen and it dies on its own. We learned about the process of how it eats barley and dies. Ayin back on the Gemara that we saw many blot ago. What about kadshe bedek habayis yiftu? If you have things that were set aside for the bedek habayis, for the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash, they should be poded, they should be redeemed. The trumos, what about foods that need to be given to truma yirka, but we will let them rot, but we don't burn them? Umaiser sheni v'kisvei kodesh, what about maiser sheni and the holy works that are in that city? Those can't be burned. Rather, yignazu. We have to make sure that they are put in geniza. If you'll recall from the Gemara we learned many moons ago, one of the rationales as to why we thought an irani dachas could not be is because you can't burn a mezuzah. Because some houses have to have a mezuzah. Our houses have dozens of mezuzahs, or whatever, a dozen. There's a lot of doorways that have mezuzahs. So, anyways, that's what the Gemara says over here, that Yignazu, they should be buried. Reb Shimon Omer, the pasuk says behemta. The pasuk says that ve'es behemta lefi charav, you kill the animals, but velo bechor, velo behemas bechoru meiser. But it's not true. They are not killed as part of nidachas. They're exempt from the killings because they have another status. They don't belong to a person. They're a bechor and they are meiser, so therefore they're pater. The pasuk says shlola prat lekesef hektish lekesef meiser, and that is the end of his statement over there. Amar mar. Let's analyze the brisa that we just learned. Hayu bakadshim kadshem mizbeach yamusu ve'amai yamusu. Why is it that the animal that belonged to the person who was part of the Ir Nidachas, this Russia, why would we say amusu? Yiru va'achi stavu. Let the animal graze until it generates a mum. V'yimkaru, and then let's sell it. V'yiplu dmein l'nedava, and then we'll take the money and we'll bring a korban nedava from it. Why don't we do that? Why do we have to say that the animal has to die? Says the Gemara, Rav Yochanan Amar zebach roshaim toeva, because the korbanos that are offered up by a Rasha are abominable. Not interested, says Hashem. That animal has to die. I don't even want its cash equivalent. Get rid of it. Goodbye. Resh Lakish Amar, no. When the brisa at the top of the page says Kache Kachem Yamusu, that's because it's Mamun Bailimhu. It actually belongs to another person, and it doesn't belong to Hakdish. But Kachem Shechai Bachrayusan, Virab Shimini to Amar Mamun Bailimhu. That when one accepts upon themselves achrayus for Kachem, even though it hasn't totally been given over yet, but Lemaisa, that's considered to still be Mamun Bailim. So says the Gemara, that's a problem, because if you look at the brisa, the first part of the brisa on the top of the page, 2 lines down, says Kadshe Mizbech Yamusu, and 2 lines later it says that it's talking about Reb Shimon. But what we just said in the Gemara is that it's Reb Shimon. The Reish is also Reb Shimon. So how does the Seifa Reb Shimon? If the Seifa is expressly talking about the sheet of Reb Shimon, which can be found 4 lines down, then the Reisha, which is 2 lines down, Lav Reb Shimon. So you can't make an ukimta that the case of Yamusu is talking about a sheet of Reb Shimon, because then the Reish and the Seifa don't click. Ella, says the Gemara, a quarter of the way down. Ella b'kodshim kalim. You're right. We're not talking about Reb Shimon in the Reisha. We're talking about kodshim kalim. Ve'aliba de Reb Yossi Haglili, and this is in accordance with the opinion of Reb Yossi Haglili. Da'amar kodshim kalim mamun bailim. That the reason why in our Mishnah, in our Brisa, I should say, at the top of this page, it says Kachem Mizbech Yamusu, is because we're dealing with Kachem Kalim, and Kachem Kalim, according to Reb Yossi Aglili, is Mamon Bailim. That's why you say Yamusu. Aval Kachem Mai Yiftu. When it comes to Kachem, what are you going to say? That it's being redeemed? That can't be. Adatani Seifa, later, not by us, but later the Mishnah says, Kache bedek abayis yiftu, that that which was sanctified to support the upkeep of the building should be redeemed. If that's true, liflog v'lisni bedida, then we should have combined our Mishnah with another factor, and this is how it would read: Bamedvar mamurim, that we say yamusu, that's bekadshim kalim, that's when they have to stay away and die. Aval kache kadshim yiftu, but we should have said that it should be redeemed. So why didn't we say that? So says the Gemara, a third of the way down, because there are case scenarios that don't fall into this neat little package of Kodshim Kalim, yes, Kodshe Kodshim is Yiftu. It doesn't always work. And because it's true, Lopsikale, because it's not something that you can paskin across the boards, so therefore we cannot use Liflog Belisni Bedida. Now the Gemara wants to analyze the shitas of Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rav Yochanan lo amar Karesh Lakish. Why did Rav Yochanan not hold of Reish Lakish? Because he had a pasuk, a slam dunk, and often a pasuk. Tichsiv zebach or shoim toeva. Ela Reish Lakish, my time alo amar Rav Yochanan. According to Reish Lakish, why doesn't he say like the sheet of Rav Yochanan? Amar lach ki amrinan. When do we say zebach rishoim toeva? When do we say that the korban of a rasha is abominable? Hani mili hecha de isnahu be'inayhu. That's when the korban is present and in front of us. Aval hacha kevan de ishtani. Here, when we say the animal should get a mum, so now that it has a mum, halachically we don't even view it as the same animal anymore. Let's learn our last little sugya for the night. We're at the 2 dots, right at the halfway point on Kuf Yud Beis and Mid Beis. Going to learn about 10 more lines and stop at the 2 dots. Reb Shimon Omer behemtecha v'lo behemas bechor u'maiser. The word behemtecha in the Torah teaches us that an animal that is a bechor or maiser does not get killed in the ir nidachas b'maya skinon. The Gemara wants to know what's the case. Ilema bit mimen shlal shamaymu. If you want to say the animal is a shalem, it's in perfect working order, there are no blemishes, that belongs to the Eibishter Pashat, that it should not be included. Ela beba'alei mumin shlalan inhu. But if you want to say that it's ba'alei mumin, then really it's in the possession of the city, and for sure it gets killed. It's just regular spoils in the city. That was what the pasuk said. So says the Gemara, let's try again. Amar Ravina la'olam b'ba'alei mumin. Really, we're dealing with a case scenario of ba'alei mumin. Umi shenechal b'toras behemtecha. Yatsu elu she'ein ne'echalin b'toras behemtecha. He says there's animals that are eaten under the category of behemtecha, but that excludes those which are not. Ela b'toras bechor u'maiser d'shlal shamayim ninu. These animals, because they're bechor and maiser, so therefore they're shlal shamayim. There's nothing that we're going to do to change that status. Not even like we said at the top of the page in Rashi that olos and ashamos could be mamon bailamu. Not even that. Here, when it comes to bechor and maiser, that belongs to the shamayim, and therefore they don't get burned in the ir nidachas. Upliga de Shmuel. This doesn't fit with the sheet of Shmuel. Damar Shmuel akol karev akol nifte. Wow, everything gets put on the korban. That's a pretty broad comment. My kamar. What does Shmuel mean when he says that everything is brought on the mizbech? Hachi kamar. Kol shekarev kshehu tam v'nifte kshehu balmum mishlola imit. Anything that had it been tam, had it been complete, that it would have been karev, and it will be redeemed when there's a balmum. That means it was excluded from mishlala. It will not be killed in an ir nidachas. V'chol shekarev kshehu tam ve'eino niftek kshu ben mum kegon b'chor meiser mi behema nafka. That we learn out from the word behema. We're going to stop right here at Trumos Yir Kavu, which was a halacha that if there was truma in a city of an ir nidachas, we let it spoil. We'll begin from there tomorrow and finish the Masechta. Wishing you all a beautiful night.